Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another exciting episode of Trigger Warning Radio. I am your host, the Kaiju Conservative. So I want you to think back, 19, 20 years now. Think back to America just after September 11th. We were at war. We had just sent troops into Afghanistan. Iraq was starting to show up on the radar as well. The country had come together after a horrific terrorist attack. And I know that's gonna. I know this is going to bring out some of the 9/11 truthers out there, but that fact of the matter is, regardless of how you view September 11th, it's an event that brought the country together almost in a way that we hadn't seen since World War II. I mean, everybody was united and in agreement that the terrorists needed to be punished, and everybody was right in line. Just about everybody was right in line with any actions that needed to be taken with that regard. Now, I don't want to today's video, I don't want to talk about September 11th itself. That's not the purpose of today's video. I'm just trying to explain some of the context for this video. Now, if you remember, back just after, I think maybe a year or two after September 11th, might have been just about a year after September 11th, the Ad Council put out a series of ads asking, what if America wasn't America? Or what if America was no longer America, or something like that? And there was one particular ad, there were a couple of them, there were like 3 or 4 ads, but there was one particular ad that I think kind of resonated with me at the time, mainly because it touched on freedom of religion. I've always been a big freedom of religion guy, despite, admittedly, as I've said in the past, not being overly religious myself. I've never had any issue with anybody being as free as they want to practice whatever faith they want. And this one particular ad kind of resonated with me back then, and I think it's very relevant today. So what I want to go ahead and do right now is I want to go ahead and play this ad for you. This is from about 2001, almost 20 years ago, just after September 11th, one of the ads in a series asking the question, what if America wasn't America? Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
May he bless you and keep you. May he grant you peace. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming. I'll see you all next week, and please be careful going home. Thank you.
Now, fast forward to today, with the Chinese coronavirus pandemic that's currently sweeping the world. We've got the nation on lockdown throughout many states. There's only a few states, I think 8 states, that did not lock down their populations in some manner. All of them, just maybe 1 or 2 blue states in there. But we've got people out of work. We've got a whole host of bad things going on. And in the midst of all of this, you have people trying to practice their faith that are being prevented from doing so by the government. I mean, you look back to what happened Easter weekend, when you had mayors and local officials, local and state officials, literally threatening churchgoers not to celebrate Easter, or else, telling them that if they celebrated Easter, they would be liable, criminally liable in some cases, civilly liable. Definitely, they would receive fines. But in some cases, they were threatened to hold, especially the pastors and preachers. They were threatening to hold them criminally liable for hosting a gathering that did not meet social distancing guidelines. And we had some localities even going further. There was that city in Missouri, I think it was. All of the attendees of a drive-in church service, $500 for violating social distancing rules in place, despite the fact that these people were in their cars, the windows were rolled up, the cars had a parking space in between each of them as well. They were social distancing just fine until the cops made them roll down their windows so that way they could fine them $500 and give them a ticket. It's the cops in that situation that violated that social distancing guideline. And this is something that's been happening all over the country. You had Mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, saying that flat out saying that he was going to close down synagogues and churches that were celebrating that were celebrating their faith, that were worshiping together for social distancing guidelines. Of course, mosques. There was a mosque in Syracuse that got to stay open. They didn't get shut down. But I wonder how many mosques in New York City proper were allowed to operate just fine without having social distancing guidelines enforced on them. And then we had over in California, there were a couple of instances as well where churches were threatened. There was a pastor that in one California town that was actually arrested for violating social distancing guidelines because he held a church service. Folks, we have gotten to the point that ad warned us about almost 20 years ago. 19 years later, 2020, we are now at that point where America is no longer America. You have people not able to practice their faith in direct violation of the Constitution, which guarantees that these people will be allowed to practice their faith however they see fit. And we have these tyrants, these local and state tyrants that are that are not allowing that to happen. Now, thankfully, the Justice Department is finally starting to step in. They stepped in Missouri, in that case, and the city withdrew the $500 fines, but it shouldn't even have gotten to that point. We are now at the point where America is no longer is just one example. I mean, we've got people being arrested for playing with their kids in a fucking park when they're by themselves, just about, for God's sake. There was that guy in I think it was Colorado who was arrested for playing softball with his 6-year-old daughter when there was nobody else in the freaking park and the park was open for activities like that. There was even a sign that said the park was open for activities like that. You had this lady in Idaho recently, just the other day, getting arrested in Idaho for having her kids in the park as well. And folks, it has gotten to the point where I don't even recognize this country anymore. And something's gonna break. Something's gonna break at some point. Eventually, people are going to get fed up of having their rights arbitrarily taken away because quote unquote pandemic and everybody's gonna die, and something's going to happen. We're already seeing massive demonstrations in a lot of states against these tyrant governors and these tyrant local officials, and we're to the point where if this goes on much longer, if this gets much more severe, we're going to get into some real civil unrest like we haven't seen in a couple of decades in this country. Mark my words, and you can take that to the bank. I think if this goes on, if this whole shutdown thing goes on for much longer than another couple of weeks.